Coming up on Network Africa. Senegal's President Macky Sall proposes amnesty for people convicted in connection with political protests in the past 3 years. 2 people shot dead in Guinea as civil workers protest high cost of living in nationwide strikes. Plus, the Republic of Benin offers 2,000 troops to Kenya-led Haiti force set for deployment to quell gang violence. Hello and welcome to the program today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Layo Olarinde. We kick off from Senegal, where President Macky Sall has proposed an amnesty for those convicted in connection with political protests in the past 3 years. He says this would make it possible to pacify the political arena and further strengthen national cohesion. He was speaking at a national dialogue which was largely boycotted by the opposition and civic groups. The suggested amnesty bill, which Mr. Sall says will be put to Parliament on Wednesday, had already been condemned by his opponents. They say the aim is to ensure that members of the security forces and President Sall himself cannot be prosecuted for the deaths of protesters. Let's have a discussion on this. Joining us now is Okwi Okpala, an African Affairs analyst. Thank you so much for your time on the program.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's begin with the political impasse in the country. Looking at where Senegal is now, with no election date in sight just yet, how would you describe what President Macky Sall has done?
Well, I think he has knowingly plunged his country into political uncertainty. The constitution is clear, and of course, he's playing a very dangerous game, a game that is likely going to gambling with thousands of lives of thousands of millions of Senegalese. And indeed, members of West African community, because instability in Senegal will also mean instability in the rest of African region. So I think it's a very dangerous gambling with the future of Senegal, gambling with democracy and peace in Senegal.
Now, he's saying that, this amnesty proposal is to pacify the political arena. Those were his words. Do you think this is enough to douse the tensions in the country?
If he actually wants to douse the temperature in the country, what he will need to do is to quickly arrange for election to happen soon enough, so that by 2nd of April, when his tenure when we finish his tenure, a president will be handed over to a democratically elected president. Any other measure that he takes is not likely going to solve the problem. Yes, it's good to start dialogue. It is good to continue dialogue. But then what happens to the constitutional provision? Beyond 2nd of April, he will become an illegitimate government. His government will become illegitimate. And nobody can guarantee peaceful transfer of power. The best thing is to follow the constitution, follow the procedure, conduct election in time early enough, so that you'll be able to hand over before the day that your tenure terminates. So, I mean, any other measure is not likely going to succeed.
Well, at this national dialogue, President Sall had also said he will honor his mandate's end in April. That is yet to be seen, and also he reiterated his commitment to ensuring that elections hold before July, saying that, before the rainy seasons begin in July. But with all that's happening in Senegal, what impact do you think this would have on the country's political landscape and also West Africa in general?
Well, saying that we all know is, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a step. The first step towards handing over is conducting an election and having a winner. If we leave and appoint somebody or select somebody through other means other than the way the Constitution has stipulated, that cannot guarantee peace. The government that even if he hands over to somebody after 2nd of April, without being a democratically elected person, then that person's legitimacy will still be questioned. And indeed, it may actually trigger conflict and even violence. So I don't see that his pledge that he will conduct election by June. The question is, what happens between 2nd of April and June when he conducts election? Who will be in charge of the country? How will that person be selected? And if that person is not, there is hardly going to be, it's very difficult to have agreement on how that person will be selected other than through election. And that is a recipe for violence and disaster and even a serious disagreement that may lead to violence.
Indeed, just to clarify, he says that the elections will be held. Well, he wants to hold the elections before July, but currently no date has been fixed. But we keep our eyes on Senegal and continue to see how things pan out there. But thank you so much, Mr. Okwi Okwala, African Affairs Analyst. Thank you always for speaking to us.
It's always my pleasure. Thank you.
Let's move on to Guinea now. 2 people have been confirmed dead after the capital city came to a standstill as workers took part in a nationwide strike. The Guinean trade union movement, an umbrella group of major unions in the country, urged public and private sector workers not to turn up to their jobs starting this week. The group of unions are demanding lower food prices, the lifting of internet restrictions, and also the release of a prominent media activist. Local media reports that schools, shops and roads were empty in the usually bustling city of Conakry on Monday. Well, this strike is coming a week after Guinea's military junta dissolved the transitional government, which had been in office since July 2022, without providing a reason. The Guinean trade union movement says the strike would be indefinite. Moving to North Africa now, at least 10 people on board a ferry have been killed after the vessel sank in the Nile just outside the Egyptian capital, Cairo. The ferry was carrying 15-day laborers, and according to media, the laborers were on their way to work at a local construction firm. The Ministry of Manpower has now allocated compensation of 200,000 Egyptian pounds to each family of the deceased and 20,000 to each of the 5 survivors that were injured. The incident took place in the town of Monshat in Giza, which is one of 3 provinces forming Greater Cairo. Ferry, railway and road accidents are common in Egypt, mainly because of poor maintenance and the lack of regulations. The Republic of Benin is offering to contribute 2,000 troops to a UN-approved Kenya-led multinational security force that will be deployed to fight gang violence in Haiti. Well, the announcement was made on Monday during a press briefing held in Guyana by the U.S. ambassador to UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield. Ms. Thomas-Greenfield said she had discussed with Haiti's Prime Minister Ariel Henry and other partners about the urgency of deploying the force. Well, the deployment was to happen this month, but it was delayed after it was blocked by a Kenyan court in January, which said the government lacked authority to send its police officers outside of Kenya. But shortly after the ruling, Kenya's President William Ruto insisted that Kenya would still send the police officers after completing paperwork to satisfy the court's demands. Now, the armed conflict in Sudan has resulted in thousands of civilians killed, millions displaced, and property looted, and also children conscripted, as the fighting has spread to more regions of the country. According to the UN Human Rights in Darfur, thousands have been killed in RSF attacks, some of which were ethnically motivated. A report finds that between May and November 2023, the RSF, one of the warring factions, and its allied Arab militia carried out at least 10 attacks against civilians in El Guinea, that's the capital of West Darfur, killing thousands of them, most of them from the African Masalite ethnic group. The report also cites the People's Authority to support the Sudanese Army Forces, a pro-SAF entity, as stating that it had armed 255,000 young men in camps across Sudan.
A report published this morning by our office details multiple indiscriminate attacks by both the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces in densely populated areas, including sites sheltering internally displaced people, particularly in the capital Khartoum, in Omdurman, Kordofan, and Darfur, during fighting between April and December 2023. Just this week, credible information received by us and video evidence reviewed by our office has shown that several students traveling by road in North Kordofan state may have been beheaded by men in SAF uniform in El Obeid city based on their perceived ethnicity as being RSF supporters. The video footage, which was posted on social media on 15 February, shows troops parading with decapitated heads in the street while chanting ethnic slurs. By mid-December, more than 6.7 million people had been displaced by the conflict, both within Sudan and into neighboring countries. This number has since increased to more than 8 million. There must be prompt, thorough, effective, transparent, independent, and impartial investigations into all allegations of violations and abuses of international human rights and violations of international humanitarian law. And those responsible must be brought to justice.
Hundreds of thousands of people displaced by the war in Sudan are being assisted in South Sudan by the International Organization for Migration, IOM. Now, over 500,000 people have crossed the border into Renk, and that's in South Sudan, and they're being assisted by the IOM through the Onward Transport Assistance.
Most of those arriving are originally South Sudanese who had been living in Sudan when the violence started. The International Organization of Migration has assisted over 161,000 to return to their villages and communities of origin or reach other places of safety.
Well, the conditions here are extremely harsh. There's hardly any water, any food, any sanitation, any security, any shelter. It's also one of the most remote areas in the country. Thousands of people have crossed the border just behind me from Sudan. Many of them are vulnerable. Many of them are traumatized. We've spoken to women, we've spoken to children and the elderly who fled the terrible violence and have spent weeks, in some cases months, trying to reach this border, trying to cross into South Sudan to reach safety.
The onward transport assistance being provided is one of the largest and most complex transport operations in IOM's history.
Hundreds of thousands of people have crossed the border from Sudan here into South Sudan and have been assisted by IOM, the International Organization for Migration, through onward transport assistance. Now, this assistance is absolutely critical because what IOM and other UN agencies don't want is for refugee camps to spring up in this location because it is so remote. There is no infrastructure, there are no hospitals, there are no medical facilities, there are no resources of any kind for those vulnerable arrivals to tap into. This onward transport assistance is absolutely critical to avoiding the situation I'm describing, and it has involved IOM putting on over 1,200 flights away from Rank into Malakal, the capital of Upper Nile State. It's also involved sea transportation. Hundreds of thousands of people, as I said, are arriving. Over 100,000 have been helped to take boats away from Rank to Malakal, which is a 3-day journey overnight on the River Nile.
Over 135,000 arrivals have been assisted with boat transport. More than 1,200 flights have been organized, and over 26,000 people have been moved by road. But an estimated 420,000 people are expected to arrive in South Sudan from Sudan this year. $32 million will be needed to provide onward transport assistance for 150,000. But IOM says a major cash crunch is looming, which will affect this critical and much-needed assistance for those arriving.
Welcome back to the program. The 7th ordinary session of the Regional Steering Committee for the Sahel Women's Empowerment and Demographic Dividend SWED project has commenced in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. Well, ahead of the scheduled meeting of the Regional Steering Committee on Thursday, the project's country coordinators are setting the stage, and this includes 12 SWED countries that constitute the governing body tasked with electing their president and vice president for a 1-year term, and notably addressing pressing issues in the country. Well, the agenda item for this meeting in Burkina Faso will center on the challenge of retaining girls in school. Burkina Faso stands out for its successful implementation of initiatives from the project's initial phase. Now, these efforts are set to have bolstered the academic proficiency of over 430,000 young girls in the country. Head of the UN peacekeeping mission, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, has concluded his visit to South Sudan. During his stay, he engaged with the country's leaders, state authorities, civil society, and the United Nations mission in the country. He also held a press conference in Juba, the capital of South Sudan, highlighting the key purposes of his visit, and that is to emphasize the strong commitment of the UN to supporting the country. Accompanied by Hannah Sewa Tete, the Secretary General's Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa, Mr. Lacroix's visit comes at a time when South Sudan is racing against the clock to hold its very first post-independence elections.
We, of course, discussed the process towards election as part of the implementation of the RCs, and how the UN could continue to work with South Sudan in terms of accompanying South Sudan towards the holding of election in the best possible conditions. We, of course, talked about the current security and humanitarian challenges in South Sudan, the intercommunal violence and the resulting impact on the humanitarian situation, the fallout from the events, the situation in Sudan, with the resulting influx of returnees and refugees to South Sudan, and again with humanitarian consequences and potentially with additional security impact as well.
Is it possible for there to be elections? It is. With political will, and if the appropriate preparations are put in place. Why? Because this is a society which particularly needs to have the best organized election that it's possible to have. And in our encouragement of completing those preparations, we've been at pains to point out we don't want the political stakeholders here to implement UN conditions or UN standards or UN election. It's a South Sudan election which was negotiated in the peace agreement. So all we are trying to do is to help people complete the obligations that they undertook when they signed that peace agreement.
A U.S.-led military exercise codenamed Justified Accord has begun in Kenya, with more than 20 nations taking part in what has been billed as the largest event of its kind in East Africa. Or the 11-day exercise, which will end next Thursday, is aimed at increasing participating countries' readiness for peacekeeping missions, crisis response, and humanitarian assistance. Well, dozens of U.S.-trained Somali commandos will partake in this exercise, which private local media says will bring together 1,000 personnel and units from 23 nations. The U.S. military says Justified Accord is its largest exercise in that part of the continent and showcases the desire of the U.S. and partner nations to increase readiness and for regional security and also crisis response. The U.S. has led similar exercises in East Africa in recent years as the region grapples with a deadly Al-Shabaab insurgency and other security challenges. Authorities in Zimbabwe continue their search for an Australian tourist who was reported missing last Friday. The authorities had earlier said that the 67-year-old man, whose identity has not been disclosed, went missing on Friday in the rainforest inside the Victoria Falls National Park. But in new details released on Monday, the authorities say the tourist had disappeared on the 17th of February and did not appear to have entered the forest. Well, a search to find him was launched, and with park rangers, police officers, and ground trackers deployed to find him, aided by drones and sniffer dogs. The tourist had been staying at a lodge near the park and had told the lodge's management that he was going to visit the park before he went missing. Back here in Nigeria, the Kaduna State Vigilance Service says it has deployed thousands of personnel to rural communities under the Safe Schools initiative. Now, this is part of measures to curb the menace of banditry and to protect students and teachers from all forms of attacks. Speaking during the deployment, the commander of the State Vigilance Service, Brigadier General Umar Ibrahim, says Governor Uba Sani is determined to stop the continuous attacks and kidnap incidents that have become a norm in the rural communities.
Kaduna has been plagued by a near-decade-old insecurity orchestrated by bandits, kidnappers, terrorists, and other criminal elements, just like most states in the northern region. Among the worst-hit places are Chikum, Kacha, Igabi, Kajuru, Kauru, Giwa, Berningwari, and Zangan Katov local government areas, where many communities have been sacked, lives lost, and socioeconomic activities drastically disrupted. In most cases, the bandits take advantage of vulnerability of the communities to attack the schools and abduct students, as well as teachers, with little or no resistance from security agencies. To curb the menace of banditry, especially in these vulnerable communities, the Kaduna State Vigilance Service has launched a program tagged Safe Schools Initiative, aimed at protecting the students and teachers against all forms of attacks. The commander of the service, Brigadier General Umar Ibrahim, says 2,700 vigilante personnel will be deployed to protect the schools across Kaduna State, in addition to others that have been sent to protect primary health centers and government facilities.
2,729 personnel are involved in Operation Safe School. 300 are involved in taking care of the primary healthcare facilities within the states. And 1,888 are involved in securing the ministry, department, and agency within the state.
According to the commander, the recruitment of 7,000 youths into the vigilance outfit is another step by the governor to enhance security in order to give the people greater confidence as they go about their legitimate businesses.
Already within his 100 days in office, the executive governor recruited 7,500 personnel. In addition to the existing 7,000, you can see 14,500 is not a small number. So we are many and we are ever ready to do that.
Due to the lingering insecurity, a vast majority of residents are lending their voices to the demand for the establishment of a state police, which they believe will play a vital role in addressing the nation's security challenges.
I believe strongly that if government will train these people they want to bring in, and then make them look like, because I think we have lesser policing in this country. But if those ones are trained and educated within a space of time, they will do well.
I believe if the government come by good welfare, good package, and the training and engrafted them into the state policing, I think it will go a long way.
The government should allow this state police. State police is the best way for us to go.
In clamoring for state police, the residents appeal that members of the Vigilance Service be integrated into the Security Command due to their vast knowledge of community policing, so they'll operate according to the constitutional provisions and legal frameworks of the country.
And finally, on the program, those aboard a Norwegian cruise line can now heave a sigh of relief as Mauritius has given the ship an all-clear to dock at the capital, Port Louis, and that's after finding no evidence of cholera on board. At least 15 people on the Norwegian Dawn were in isolation with a stomach illness, and authorities feared it was cholera. However, the director of Mauritius Ministry of Health has confirmed the passengers do not have cholera, adding that they have fully recovered. Mauritian authorities had initially blocked the US-owned luxury cruise ship with more than 3,000 passengers and crew to avoid any health risks. And that's all for today on Network Africa. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.